Minutes before my daughter's baby shower, my son-in-law's mother walked into the sunroom, set a leather portfolio on the glass table, and said, "Sign the lake house over to Ashley today, or you can explain to 60 guests why you're not coming to the reception." Then my daughter's husband stood beside his mother and said, "Just sign it, Frank. It's not like you use the place anymore." I looked at the two of them for a long moment, closed the portfolio without opening it, picked up my jacket, and walked out onto the porch. 9 days later, the life they thought they had built started coming apart at the seams. If your jaw is already tight, good. Stay with me. I'm going to tell you exactly how it happened, and I want to know where you're watching from. Tell me your city, your state, in the comments, because I read every one of them. Some details in this story have been changed to protect the people involved, but the truth underneath it is real, and I think it's worth your time. The porch smelled like cut grass and charcoal. The particular smell of a Saturday in June when somebody's got a grill going 3 houses down and doesn't care that it's not quite noon yet. I'd been standing at the railing for about 10 minutes, holding a glass of lemonade I hadn't touched, watching my granddaughter's swing set cast long shadows across the yard, when Diane came through the screen door without knocking on the frame the way she usually did. Diane Whitfield, my son-in-law's mother, 62 years old, hair the color of brushed steel, always dressed like she was one phone call away from closing a real estate deal. Because most days, she was. She had a leather portfolio under one arm, the kind with brass corners, and she set it on the glass table between the porch chairs like she was placing evidence in front of a jury. I looked at the portfolio. I didn't touch it. "Frank," she said, "I think it's time we had a real conversation." "About what?" I said. Not a question so much as a placeholder, because I already had a feeling. "The lake house." She tapped 2 fingers against the leather cover. "You haven't been up there in what, 3 years? 4? It's sitting empty most of the year, and meanwhile Ashley and Marcus are trying to build a life, trying to give my granddaughter, our granddaughter, someplace stable. That house could be a legacy for this family instead of a museum you visit twice a summer." My chest did something tight and familiar, the way it always did when somebody started talking about my wife's house like it was a line item. Carol had picked out that lake house herself, walked the property with a real estate agent in 1994 while she was 6 months pregnant with Ashley, told me she could already see herself on that dock with grandkids someday. She never got the grandkids. Ovarian cancer took her 11 years ago, 4 years before Ashley even met Marcus. That house wasn't empty because I'd forgotten about it. It was empty because every board on that dock had her handprints on it in some way I couldn't explain to a woman holding a leather portfolio. I kept my face still. 41 years running an HVAC supply company teaches you that much, at least how to let somebody finish their pitch before you decide whether it's worth a reaction. "And if I'd rather keep it," I said. Diane smiled the way people smile when they've already rehearsed the next line. "Then I suppose we'll have an awkward afternoon. There are 60 people arriving in about 90 minutes for a baby shower celebrating your first great-grandchild, Frank, and I don't think you want to be the reason the mood in that backyard turns sour before the cake's even cut." That's when Marcus stepped through the door behind her, my daughter's husband, 34 years old, the kind of easy smile that had charmed me for the first 2 years of knowing him, and had started, more recently, to look less like warmth and more like a well-practiced expression he put on before difficult conversations. He didn't sit. He stood next to his mother with his hands in his pockets, the picture of a man trying to look casual about something that wasn't casual at all. "Frank, come on," he said. "Nobody's trying to strong-arm you. We just think, realistically, at your age, holding on to a second property 4 hours away doesn't make sense anymore. Sign it over, we handle the taxes and the upkeep going forward, and you never have to think about it again. It's not like you use the place. It's not like you use the place." I turned that sentence over once in my mind and set it down carefully, the way you'd set down something sharp. "I use it every August," I said. "I was there 3 weeks ago." Sure, Marcus said, waving a hand like the correction was beside the point. "But going forward, long term, think about Emma, my great-granddaughter, 6 months old, currently asleep in a bassinet inside the house, while the two of them tried to talk me out of the last physical piece of my wife I had left." I looked at Diane. I looked at Marcus. I thought about the 60 people who would be filling this backyard in 90 minutes. The balloon arch already half assembled by the garage, My daughter Ashley somewhere inside trying on the third dress of the morning because none of them fit quite right yet, 4 months postpartum, and still figuring out her own body. I thought about how easy it would be to make this go away with one signature, and how much harder it would be to live with myself afterward. I need some air, I said, and I picked my jacket up off the back of the chair. Frank. Diane's voice sharpened just slightly, the real estate pleasantness cracking at the edges. We don't have time for you to go take a walk and think about your feelings. People are going to start arriving. Then I suggest you greet them, I said. And I walked past both of them, down the porch steps, and out toward my truck at the curb. Behind me, I heard Marcus say something low to his mother that I didn't catch all of, but I caught enough something about he's not going to make a scene. He never does, and I felt that sentence land somewhere behind my sternum and stay there the whole drive home. I didn't go home, actually. I drove 11 minutes across town to Whitmore and Associates, the law office where Gerald Whitmore had handled my business contracts, my will, and Carol's estate for the better part of 30 years. Gerald was 74, technically retired, but he still kept office hours 3 days a week because, as he liked to say, retirement was for men who didn't enjoy their work, and he'd never once found the law boring. His secretary let me straight back when she saw my face. "You look like a man who just left somewhere he didn't want to be," Gerald said, not looking up from the folder on his desk right away. "I did," I said. I sat down across from him without being asked. "Gerald, I need you to tell me something, and I need the honest answer, not the gentle one." He set the folder aside and gave me his full attention, the way he'd given every client his full attention since before I had gray in my beard. "Go ahead. If somebody wanted to force an elderly relative out of a piece of property legally, cleanly, so it didn't look like what it was, how would they do it?" Gerald was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned back in his chair, the old leather creaking under him. "Depends how patient they are. The clumsy way is direct pressure guilt, family obligation, an ultimatum at a moment when you're least likely to push back. That gets you a signature if the person folds, but it also gets challenged in court the second somebody claims duress." He tapped his pen against the desk. "The patient way is different. The patient way, you start establishing a paper trail months in advance. You get yourself named on accounts. You find a doctor willing to note something in a chart that isn't quite accurate. You build a record that makes it look, on paper, like the person wasn't fully capable of managing their own affairs. Then the signature isn't even necessary. You just petition." My stomach went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "Petition for what?" "Guardianship," Gerald said. "Conservatorship, some states call it. If a judge believes you're not capable of managing your own financial affairs, they can appoint someone else to do it for you. And once that happens, Frank, that person controls everything. Bank accounts, property, medical decisions. You'd have less legal authority over your own life than your granddaughter has over hers." I sat with that for a long moment, the office suddenly very quiet except for the tick of the clock on Gerald's bookshelf, the same clock that had been there since I first walked into this room in 1987 to draw up incorporation papers for the business. "Why are you asking me this?" Gerald said carefully, "instead of telling me it already happened?" "Because an hour ago my son-in-law's mother put a portfolio on my porch table and told me to sign the lake house over to my daughter and her husband or ruin the baby shower, and Marcus said something to her on the way out that I don't think he meant for me to hear." "What did he say?" "He said I never make a scene." Gerald's expression didn't change much, but something behind his eyes sharpened, the way it used to right before he found a hole in an opposing counsel's argument. "That's not the sentence of a man who's improvising, Frank. That's the sentence of a man who's been planning around your predictable behavior." "Meaning what?" "Meaning, I think you should let me pull some records before you sign anything, attend anything, or agree to anything for at least the next week." He reached for a legal pad and clicked his pen. "Starting with your bank accounts. When's the last time you looked closely at your statements?" Not glanced. Looked. I had to think about that longer than I wanted to admit out loud. "Marcus set up online banking for me 2 years ago. Said it'd make things easier since I don't love computers. He helps me check it sometimes." Gerald wrote something down and underlined it twice. "Frank, I want you to go home. Do not go back to that baby shower today. Call your daughter, tell her you're not feeling well, and I mean that as a kindness to yourself, not a lie. I imagine your stomach is in knots right now, and that's the truth. Give me until Monday. I'm going to need account access. I'm going to need every document Diane put in that portfolio if you can get your hands on it, and I'm going to need you to write down, right now, Everything Marcus has ever asked you to sign in the last 2 years. Everything. Even the things that seemed small. So I sat in his office for the next 40 minutes and wrote the refinancing paperwork on the lake house 18 months ago that Marcus said would lower the property tax burden. The power of attorney form he'd asked me to sign just as a formality, in case anything ever happens while you're traveling, which I now recalled I had never actually read past the first page because Marcus had been holding Emma's ultrasound photos in his other hand at the time, practically vibrating with excitement about becoming a father, and I hadn't wanted to slow the moment down with paperwork. The joint account he'd suggested we open, for convenience, so I can help manage bills if you're ever in the hospital, which I'd agreed to because 11 years alone in that house had made me more grateful than I like to admit for a family member paying attention to my life. By the time I finished the list, my hand was cramping and my chest ached with something that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite rage, something that lived in the space between the two. "This is more than I expected," Gerald said quietly, looking over the page. "It's more than I expected too," I said. I didn't think of any of it as a pattern while it was happening. It just felt like family helping family. "That's usually how it's designed to feel," Gerald said. "Go home, Frank. I'll call you Monday morning." I did not go to the baby shower. I called Ashley from my truck, sitting in the law office parking lot with the engine off, and told her I wasn't feeling well, which was true in every way that mattered, and that I'd make it up to her. She sounded disappointed but not suspicious. My daughter has never doubted a word I've said to her in 38 years. And something about that trust sitting in my chest that afternoon felt less like comfort and more like a weight I hadn't been carrying carefully enough. Monday morning, Gerald called before 8. "Come in," he said, "and Frank, bring coffee. You're going to want to be sitting down for this, and caffeine helps people sit still." His office looked different that morning, or maybe I was different walking into it. 3 folders were stacked on his desk, tabbed and organized the way Gerald organized things when he expected a fight. His secretary had brought in a second chair, which she never did unless a meeting was going to run long. "I pulled everything," he said, without any preamble, which told me immediately how bad it was. "Frank, the joint account Marcus talked you into 2 years ago. In the last 14 months, $41,000 has moved out of that account into an account held solely in Marcus's name, not joint, solely his." The number landed somewhere behind my ribs and sat there, heavy. $41,000, I repeated, because saying it out loud seemed like the only way to make it feel real. "That's not the part that worries me most." Gerald slid a second folder across the desk. "The power of attorney you signed 18 months ago, the one you told me you didn't fully read, it's a durable power of attorney, Frank. Broad authority. Financial decisions, property decisions, even certain healthcare decisions, effective immediately, not contingent on any determination of incapacity. You handed him legal authority to act on your behalf the day you signed that page while he was showing you ultrasound photos." I felt something go very still and very cold in my chest. "He's had that authority for a year and a half." "He has," Gerald said. "And 3 weeks ago, Frank, someone submitted paperwork to a physician's office requesting a cognitive evaluation be scheduled for you, not requested by you. The request came from an email address registered to Marcus Reyes, using the durable power of attorney as the basis for authority to schedule the appointment on your behalf." The room tilted very slightly, the way a room does when the floor underneath you turns out to be different than you thought. "They were setting up a competency finding," I said slowly, working it out loud because I needed to hear myself say it before I could believe it. "Documentation that I wasn't capable. And with a broad power of attorney already in place. They wouldn't need the lake house deed signed over at all," Gerald finished. "If a physician's evaluation supported a finding of diminished capacity, and given the authority already granted in that POA, Marcus could execute the property transfer himself, legally, cleanly. You wouldn't sign anything, Frank, because your signature would no longer be required." He let that sit in the room for a moment. "The pressure at the baby shower wasn't really about getting you to sign, I don't think. I think it was a pressure test to see if you'd fold quietly, which would have been simpler for everyone, or whether you'd resist, which they may have already been preparing for." I sat with my hands flat on my knees, staring at a spot on Gerald's carpet, trying to find my way back to solid ground. "There's one more thing," Gerald said, and something in his voice made me look up. "The evaluation was scheduled with a Dr. Holloway." "I made some calls this weekend," Frank quietly, "through channels. Nothing that tips anyone off yet. Doctor, Holloway has had 2 prior instances flagged by the state medical board involving cognitive assessments in disputed guardianship cases. Both times, the findings were later successfully challenged and reversed. He's not an incompetent physician. He is, from what I can gather, a physician willing to find what a paying party needs him to find, for the right consideration. They paid him, I said. It wasn't a question anymore. I don't have proof of that yet, Gerald said carefully. But I intend to get it. Frank, I need you to trust me on the next part, because it's going to feel wrong. I need you to keep behaving exactly as you have been. Friendly, cooperative, a little tired maybe, from the baby shower incident, nothing more. Let the evaluation appointment stand. Do not cancel it. I want to be in that room, quietly, with documentation of my own, and I want a second, independent physician's evaluation, completed within 72 hours. After one I select, one with no connection to anyone in this situation, so that when Dr. Holloway's report comes back saying whatever it's designed to say, we have an immediate, credible contradiction sitting right next to it. You want me to walk into a rigged evaluation. I want you to walk into it fully informed, with your own attorney present as is your legal right, and with a second opinion locked and loaded before the first one's ink is even dry, Gerald said. There's a difference between walking in blind and walking in as bait. I thought about Carol then, the way I found myself thinking about her at every hard turn in the 11 years since she'd gone, and I thought about what she would have said sitting in that chair beside me. She'd have told me to stop being polite about it. She'd have told me that spending 40 years building something, the business, the house on the lake, a family that trusted each other only to hand it over quietly because someone found the right paperwork to weaponize was not dignity. It was surrender dressed up as good manners. All right, I said. Set it up. I'll play along. The appointment was scheduled for the following Thursday. In the 6 days between that conversation and the evaluation, I did something I had never done in 11 years of marriage to online banking apps and passwords. Marcus had helped me set up. I sat down with my granddaughter's old laptop, the one Ashley had given me 2 Christmases ago that mostly gathered dust in my study, and I taught myself, slowly, and with more frustration than I'd like to admit, how to actually read a bank statement online instead of letting someone summarize it for me over the phone. Gerald's paralegal, a patient young woman named Priya, walked me through it over 2 phone calls, and by Wednesday night I could pull up transaction histories myself and understand, finally, what I was looking at. What I found, going back further than the 41,000 Gerald had already flagged, made my hands shake on the keyboard. A pattern, once I knew to look for it, going back nearly 2 years, small transfers at first, a few $100s here and there that I'd have never noticed on their own, growing steadily larger as Marcus apparently grew more confident that I wasn't watching. Home improvement charges on a house that wasn't mine, at least not the primary one. I recognized the vendor name from a kitchen renovation Ashley had mentioned offhand at Thanksgiving, one she'd said Marcus's consulting bonus had paid for. I hadn't questioned it at the time. I had no reason to. I trusted the man raising my great-granddaughter. Thursday came the way difficult days do, slower in anticipation and faster once they arrive. I sat in Dr. Holloway's waiting room with Gerald beside me, dressed in a suit rather than his usual office clothes, a leather folio on his lap that I recognized as the twin of the one Diane had set on my porch table 9 days earlier, except this one was mine. This one was armor instead of ambush. The evaluation itself lasted 40 minutes. Dr. Holloway asked me to remember 3 words. Count backward from 100 by 7s. Draw a clock face showing a specific time. I did all of it correctly, deliberately, carefully, aware, the entire time, that somewhere in this building, or perhaps already before I'd walked in, a conclusion may have been decided independent of my performance in that chair. Gerald sat silently through the whole thing, taking notes, saying nothing, letting the physician conduct his examination without interference, because interference wasn't the plan. Documentation was the plan. Dr. Holloway's report arrived at Gerald's office 6 days later. It found, in careful clinical language, evidence of mild but clinically significant cognitive impairment consistent with early-stage decline, warranting further evaluation of financial decision-making capacity. I had scored, by every objective measure administered in that room, within the fully normal range for a man of 68. I know this because the independent evaluation Gerald had arranged, conducted 48 hours after the first by a neuropsychologist 2 hours away, with no connection to anyone involved, found exactly that full capacity. No impairment. A formal written opinion stating the first evaluation's conclusions were not supported by the administered testing and recommending the first report be regarded with significant skepticism regarding its methodology. Two reports. Two opposite conclusions. One built to open a door, and one built to slam it shut again. Now we know how they're planning to move, Gerald said, laying both reports side by side on his desk like two hands of cards. And now we have what we need to stop it before it starts. Frank, I want to bring in someone else. Priya's been doing some digging into Marcus's employment situation, and there's a piece of this you need to hear. Priya joined us that afternoon, laptop open, a stack of printouts organized with color-coded tabs that told me she'd been busier than I'd realized over the past week. She was thorough in the way that reminded me a little of Carol unwilling to present anything until she was certain of it. Marcus told your daughter, and told you, that he received a consulting bonus 18 months ago that funded some home renovations, Priya said. I looked into the company he claims that bonus came from, Sterling Advisory Partners. It's a real firm. Marcus did work there briefly, but he was terminated 14 months ago, Frank. Not laid off. 300. Terminated, according to a former colleague I spoke with, for what she described only as a conflict involving client funds that the firm handled quietly to avoid litigation. I felt the floor tilt again, the second time in 2 weeks. He's been unemployed for over a year? Ashley thinks he's still consulting. She told everyone at the shower he was traveling for a client. I believe your daughter believes that, Priya said gently. I don't believe it's true. And Frank, the $41,000 that moved out of your joint account over the past 14 months lines up very closely with the timeline of his termination. Almost to the week. The picture assembling itself in front of me was worse than anything I'd let myself imagine sitting on that porch 9 days earlier. This wasn't a son-in-law trying to secure a stable future for his family. This was a man who had lost his income, hidden it from his wife, drained his father-in-law's account to cover the gap, and when that money ran out, turned to the one asset large enough to solve the problem permanently, a lake house with no mortgage, worth more than his entire salary had ever been, sitting mostly unused 4 hours away. Does Ashley know any of this? I asked, and my voice came out rougher than I meant it to. I don't know, Gerald said honestly. That's the question we need to answer next, and carefully, because how you handle that conversation may matter more than anything else in this entire situation. I drove to my daughter's house that evening without calling first, something I almost never did. Ashley answered the door with Emma on her hip, 6 months old, and drooling happily onto a burp cloth, and the sight of the two of them together, my daughter, tired in the particular way. New motherhood tires a person, and my great-granddaughter, oblivious to every complicated thing happening around her, nearly stopped me from saying anything at all. Dad, hey, are you feeling better? You missed a great shower, everyone asked about you. Ashley, I need to talk to you. Just you. Is Marcus home? Something in my face must have told her this wasn't a casual visit, because her smile faded and she stepped back to let me in without another word. We sat at her kitchen table, the same table Marcus and I had shared Thanksgiving dinner across 3 months earlier, and I told her everything. The portfolio on my porch, the power of attorney he'd asked me to sign while she was 6 months pregnant and none of us wanted to slow down the good news with paperwork, the $41,000, the termination from Sterling Advisory that he'd hidden from her for 14 months, the evaluation appointment, and what it had been designed to produce. I watched my daughter's face move through disbelief, then confusion, then something that broke my heart more than anything else that had happened in the past 2 weeks, a dawning, sickening recognition, the look of someone realizing that pieces of her own life she'd never questioned were starting to arrange themselves into a shape she didn't want to see. He told me the renovation money was from a bonus, she said quietly, staring at her hands. He told me he was still consulting for Sterling. He left the house every morning at 8, Dad. He wore a suit. He talked about client calls. Her voice cracked slightly. Where has he been going? I don't know, I said honestly. But I think it's time we both found out. Ashley didn't cry. Not then. She got very still and very quiet, the way her mother used to get right before she made a decision she'd already fully thought through. I want to see the paperwork, she said. All of it. The power of attorney, the account statements, the evaluation report. I want to see it myself, Dad, not secondhand. I called Gerald that night and he agreed to meet with both of us the following morning. And I want to tell you that watching my daughter go through those documents at Gerald's conference table was one of the harder things I've done in 70 years of living. Because I watched something in her trust, mostly, but also a kind of certainty about the life she thought she'd built, come apart quietly and permanently across about 90 minutes. I want to talk to him myself, she said finally, pushing the last folder away from her. Before anything else happens, he's still my husband, Emma's father. I owe him the chance to explain, even if I already know there isn't a good explanation. Gerald and I exchanged a look, and he gave the smallest nod, the kind that told me he thought this was reasonable, if difficult. That's your right, he said to Ashley. I'd only ask that you not sign anything, agree to anything, or reveal how much documentation we've already gathered until we've had a chance to talk through it together first. She went home that afternoon to confront her husband, and I spent the next 4 hours in Gerald's waiting room unable to concentrate on anything, drinking coffee I didn't want, checking my phone every few minutes. She called at 6:40 that evening. Her voice was steady in a way that told me she'd cried already and finished crying, at least for now. He didn't deny it, she said. Any of it. He said he was going to tell me eventually, once he'd fixed it. He said his mother knew about the job loss and had been helping him figure out how to handle it without me finding out, because Diane didn't want me to panic during the pregnancy. A long pause. Dad, he said the lake house was supposed to be temporary. He said once he sold it he was going to pay everything back and I'd never have to know any of it happened. Did he know about the evaluation? About what Dr. Holloway's report was designed to say? Another pause, longer this time. He said that was his mother's idea. He said he told her he didn't feel right about it, but he didn't stop her either. Her voice thinned out. I asked him if he understood what he almost did to you. He said she stopped, steadied herself. He said he was trying to protect our family, and that you'd have been fine, that people recover from things like guardianship all the time once the crisis passes. I closed my eyes and let that sentence sit in the space around me, because there wasn't anything useful to say to it out loud. I told him to leave, Ashley said. Tonight. I need time, Dad. I need to figure out what this means for Emma, for us, for everything. But I am not staying in a marriage built on being lied to for 14 months while my father was nearly declared incompetent so my husband could hide his mistakes. I want to tell you the story ends there, with Ashley's strength and Marcus packing a bag, but real endings are rarely that clean, and this one wasn't either. Diane called me 2 days later, her voice tight with something between apology and self-justification, asking to meet, saying there had been a misunderstanding that she wanted to clear up before things escalated further than necessary. I agreed to meet her, with Gerald present, at his office rather than my porch, because I had learned by then that the location of a difficult conversation matters more than people think. She arrived without the leather portfolio this time. She looked smaller in Gerald's conference room than she had on my porch, though I couldn't have told you exactly why. Frank, I want you to understand my intentions, she started. Marcus was drowning. I was trying to help my son, the only way I knew how, and I let myself believe the ends could justify. Diane, I said, and something in my voice must have surprised her, because she stopped talking. You tried to have a doctor falsify a cognitive evaluation so my legal rights over my own life could be taken away without my knowledge. That is not help. That is elder financial abuse, and depending on what my attorney and I decide over the next several days, it may also be a matter for the state licensing board and potentially criminal fraud investigators. Diane went pale. Frank, surely we can handle this within the family. You made it a family matter the moment you put a portfolio on my porch table and threatened to embarrass me in front of 60 guests if I didn't hand over my late wife's house, I said. I'm willing to consider what happens next carefully, and I'm willing to think about what's best for my granddaughter and my great-granddaughter above all else. But I am not willing to pretend the last 2 weeks didn't happen. Gerald slid a document across the table. Not a lawsuit, not yet, but a formal notice that we had retained counsel, documented the pattern of conduct, and reported Dr. Holloway's conduct to the state medical board, whose investigation was already underway based on prior flagged incidents. He explained, in the calm, measured way he'd used across 4 decades of difficult conversations, that Marcus's power of attorney was being formally revoked effective immediately, that the joint account would be closed and any further attempted transfers would be treated as unauthorized, and that whether further legal action followed would depend, in part, on whether the $41,000 was repaid in full within 90 days. Diane left that meeting quieter than she'd arrived at any point across the past 2 weeks. What happened over the following months surprised me in ways I hadn't expected. Marcus, to his credit, and I don't offer that phrase lightly, given everything, did not fight the repayment terms. He sold his car, took a job at a logistics company that paid roughly half what Sterling Advisory once had, and began sending monthly payments to an escrow account Gerald set up to track the debt. He and Ashley separated for 4 months while she decided what she wanted, attended therapy separately, and then, eventually, together, and made the decision hers, entirely hers. And I told her I'd support whatever she chose to try to rebuild the marriage on honest footing rather than end it. I don't know if I'd have made the same choice at her age, but it wasn't my choice to make, and I've tried, across the years since, to remember that the hardest part of loving your children as adults is trusting them to run their own difficult math. Dr. Holloway's medical license was suspended 6 months later, pending a formal board hearing, after 2 additional complaints from other families surfaced once the first investigation became public record. I understand from Gerald that the guardianship system in this country relies more heavily than most people realize on the assumption that families act in good faith, and that when they don't, the people most at risk are exactly the people I used to be 9 days before Diane put that portfolio on my table, trusting, a little too polite for their own good, and unwilling to imagine that the people closest to them might be capable of something like this. The lake house is still mine. I go up every August, same as I always have, and this past summer, for the first time since Emma was born, Ashley brought her up for a weekend without Marcus. Just the 2 of them and me, and we sat on the dock Carol picked out in 1994 and watched the water go, that particular gold color it turns right before sunset. Emma is old enough now to reach for the water and laugh when it's cold, and I found myself thinking, watching her, that Carol had been right after all. She just didn't get to see it the way she pictured it. Some things arrive late, and different than expected, and are worth having anyway. I am not a perfect father, or a perfect grandfather, and I want to say that plainly, because a story like this can make a man sound wiser than he actually was in the moment. I let a young man manage my banking because computers frustrated me, and that frustration cost me more than money, almost cost me my independence. I signed a document I didn't fully read because I didn't want to interrupt a happy moment with caution. I trusted easily, for a long time, because trusting easily was who I'd always been, and I didn't think carefully enough about what that trust could cost if it landed in the wrong hands. If there's one thing I'd tell any parent or grandparent listening to this, it's this. Love your family with your whole heart, and read every single document anyway. Ask questions even when it feels rude to ask them. Check your own accounts with your own eyes, even if someone you trust offers to handle it for you. Especially then. The people who love you and the people who are willing to exploit that love are not always easy to tell apart in the moment, and sometimes they are the very same people, capable of both things at once, which is the hardest truth in this whole story and the one I still turn over some nights when I can't sleep. Every family carries a version of this story somewhere inside it, whether it's already happened or is still waiting to. I hope telling you mine helps you recognize the shape of it a little sooner than I did. If this story meant something to you, I'd be grateful if you'd share it with someone who needs to hear it. A parent, a sibling, anyone managing an aging relative's affairs, anyone who's ever signed something quickly because slowing down felt inconvenient in the moment. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I read every single one, and I'll be here for the next story, whenever you're ready to listen.